So here's the example. So the example is the South Pole expedition in 1910. So on the left here is Robert Falcon Scott. He is the hero of this story. He joined the Royal Navy at the age of 13. He was a member of a middle-class family, but that had a long history of military history. So his father, or his grandfather, had been a captain. He had uncles who were in the army and the navy. And when he was going up through the ranks, he became lieutenant, which is quite a climb from a cadet. And the problem was that his father went bankrupt, and he was the only breadwinner of the family. And lieutenants don't earn very much money, so he had to find a way of becoming a captain to get that promotion and to get a ship. And once you were actually on a ship as a captain, you'd earn quite a lot of money, and you'd be able to supply for his family. So he went out to look for naval vessels that he could command. But the only thing he could command was a vessel called the Discovery, HMS Discovery, and that was on its way to the South Pole, and they were going to do some Antarctic exploration. They were going to set up a base there, and they were going to see if they could get up on the Ross Ice Shelf. So he joined that ship as, I think, still as a lieutenant, was made a captain during the expedition. But the expedition was at a time, let's say, just at the beginning of the 20th century, where the British Empire was crumbling, and they were looking basically for these heroes. They needed people that were, a stalwart of the English identity, these great heroes that were stronger than nature and had proved themselves. So when he came back, he was a hero. He was the first person to discover parts of the Ross Ice Shelf, and he'd made his way into Antarctica, and he'd had a very hard walk towards the South Pole. They tried to get south. Hadn't worked, but at least he'd given it his best. And he'd returned, and basically he was feted in the newspapers and became a socialite. And he even married this lady, Kathleen Bruce, who was totally above his class, but now he was a British hero. Now, Kathleen Bruce wanted him to keep being a hero, so she kind of cajoled him into his next expedition, which is the Terra Nova expedition. Now, because he was so famous, he decided, okay, I'm going to be able to get a lot of money in, and he did. He got lots and lots of money. Luckily, there was another expedition to the South Pole, which also failed, so the South Pole still hadn't been captured yet. And so eventually there were 8,000 applicants to join this expedition, and he selected the best 65. So there was basically all of the people he could get on the Terra Nova expedition, or on the ship, the Terra Nova. He hired them all, but they were absolutely the cream of the crop. So they were the strongest soldiers, the most up-and-coming officers, the world's best geologists, meteorologists, scientists that would do exploration. They're all very fit. So it's all about these absolutely fantastic individuals. So he'd got the perfect people, and he was on his way to the South Pole. Unluckily for him, so were these guys. So these are 8 Norwegians. Here they're on board the Gjøa, which is a small fishing vessel. And these guys basically spent all of their life trying to become polar explorers. And they finally succeeded. They'd taken this small fishing boat around the northwest passage of Canada. And so they discovered the first sea link from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And they were famous for it because there had been a lot of expeditions that had actually failed, and some of them had failed spectacularly, one being the British expedition. So people were kind of interested, but they were also a bit disappointed that these 8 kind of, fishermen and navigators and really not very high society types from Norway, so like Viking, not fully civilized people, that they'd managed to do that. Now, none of these guys were the best at anything. Well, I think one of them was quite good at Nordic skiing. But they could all do carpentry, they could all navigate. They, like I said, spent like years and years with the Sami and the Inuit people in the North Pole region. So they knew as much as you could know about surviving in those conditions. They knew each other really well. So they mastered the art of exploration, but yeah, they weren't the world's best, definitely not. So I'd say, you know, if I was a betting man, I would say Scott's got the upper hand here. There are 19 of these Norwegians, 8 of whom are going to actually do the expedition, versus 65, the world's best, heading for the South Pole. So they also had quite a different approach to planning, these two groups. So Scott, I'll take an example. So this thing you see down here is called a Amundsen sled. It's basically a sled that you pull across the snow, and in this case, this is a Norwegian version, so they used sled dogs, huskies. But the English had, of course, much more. So they had sled dogs, and they had horses, and they had motor, like tractors, basically. And they also had these special harnesses that they could man-haul the sleds to the South Pole. And there's a problem with the sleds, because basically Antarctica is about 10 degrees colder than the North Pole. It's really cold. And the problem is, well, basically a sled works like this. You've got these two runners, they're like skis, and they, by putting some pressure on them, a microscopic film of water appears under each runner. And so as you pull it, it basically melts a bit of snow and it runs along. That's why it slides. So if you've ever been skiing, you're actually skiing on water. You're not skiing on the snow. Until it gets really cold. So when it's really cold, that water does not appear. What happens is it feels like pulling a sled through the sand. In fact, that's literally what Scott said. He said, yeah, there's something wrong with our sleds. It feels like we're pulling them through the desert. So what did Scott do about this? Well, he basically said, okay, I've got these sleds, I've got all of this stuff to pull them. What we're going to do is we're just going to work harder. So we're going to send everybody towards the South Pole with all of the sleds we've got, and we're just going to kind of brute force it, stick to the plan. This was the plan, we've been planning this for 2 years, just pull harder, we'll get to the South Pole. The Norwegians said, okay, so it seems that we have a problem with the sleds. What can we do? Well, we can do two things. We can make them even lighter, so they stripped off any little bits that they thought were unnecessary. They knew it was quite flat because they had a depot laying expedition in the first summer. And they realized, okay, so what we'll do is we'll just make really light sleds. That makes the friction at least a bit less. But the other thing was they spend a lot of time with the Inuit. And the Inuit do come across circumstances where it's so cold that the sleds freeze to the snow. And what do? Well, they melt a bit of snow into water, pour it on the runner, that forms an ice layer on the runner, and then it basically acts like a kind of solid lubricant. It scrapes off the ice, and they run much more easily, which means you can still use your dogs to really make a pace across the snow. So Scott had all of the stuff. He had a really good, well-planned expedition. However, what Amundsen's expedition, so the Norwegian expedition, did was to have a very simple plan and one that they could adapt. So they were actually iterating on how to plan. They were sticking to the plan. So who won? Do you know the story? It's quite a well-known story. So Amundsen got to the South Pole. He was the first. He got there on the 14th of December. Found a big white plain with nothing there, which is what you want to find. He put a tent down. He made circles to make sure that he was the first to cross the South Pole. He waited for a bit. No one appeared. So they headed back to their expedition home. That's quite interesting. They actually weighed themselves when they left Trondheim, their base camp, and then they weighed themselves when they got back, and they put on a bit of weight because they'd, moving every day in the fresh air, it makes you more healthy. Scott died. So Scott, yes, but also very tragic. So he'd stuck to the plan, and his tractors had broken down. After that, his ponies died. After that, his men started dying, and he ended up on the Ross ice shelf, frozen in the tent. And it was so late in the season, in fact, that his rescue expedition, who'd also not, because the plan didn't say anything about rescuing anyone, they hadn't gone to rescue him. So they found him another year later, because they had to actually wait for the winter to pass. So how did these guys feel about this? Well, Scott obviously thought he lost, but he also thought he lost not because of his fantastic plan, but because there were misfortunes. He'd basically been unlucky. But the funny thing is, Amundsen also didn't feel like he'd won. So what's going on here? Because in terms of winning, you'd think Amundsen would think, yay, I won. But Amundsen wasn't actually in this to get to the South Pole. Amundsen was actually on an expedition to get to the North Pole, except that he thought somebody had already reached the North Pole. And that's when he changed his plans to go and head to the South Pole. Because what he wanted to do was to prove his mastery as a polar explorer. And he basically found a whole load of challenges that would prove to himself that he was a master explorer. So he rounded the Northwest Passage. He spent loads of time trying to cross Greenland and doing a lot of these challenges in the polar area. Then he conquered the South Pole, where he was a bit surprised about the fact that he was at the absolute opposite end of the world from where he was supposed to be. And then he went again, because when he got back, he basically was in debt and he had to pay for another expedition, and people were angry at him because of this, he'd basically beaten this hero to the South Pole. So he went and had another North Pole expedition, and then another one. And it turns out that he's probably actually the first person to reach the North Pole as well, because those two expeditions that he thought had reached the North Pole later turned out to have actually faked it. So what's high performance? Well, so this is what I try and teach at companies, or to try and get across at companies. The high performance in the question is already, it's about this winning. Now, that's not really a mastery mindset. The way you can survive in this, we've just heard a talk about how complex and how quickly changing circumstances are, and that sounds really scary. But actually, it's about playing outside with your friends. It's basically quite fun when things change a bit and you can kind of adapt to the circumstances. So business agility and agility in general is much more about that adaptability and about that mindset. So the next time you're thinking about, okay, which framework and what structure and what statics do I need to actually have to be called agile or to have agility, think of these Norwegian guys who were out skiing and having fun and running their dog sled up and down to the South Pole and still having the feeling they didn't win, because mastery, you never actually win. It's all about continuously improving.